All right, to start things off for our concept video 1, we're going to be talking about providing emotional support. And so we're going to talk about comforting, we're going to go over the guidelines, and then at the end there will be some exam prep and a reflection question. But you can also find these exam prep and reflection questions in Blackboard. So first, what is comforting? Comforting is helping others feel better about themselves, their behavior, and their situation by creating a safe space to express their thoughts and feelings. So you as the communicator and the listener are allowing someone else to communicate with you, and you're creating a safe space for them to do that. And that's really important. It shows that research shows that both men and women value emotional support, both with their romantic partners and then also in their friendships, because everybody's going to go through things. You're going to go through things, and you're going to need somebody to lean on. I think there's a song about that. But basically, comforting also helps those helps improve self-esteem in others. It's going to also help if you feel comforted. It's also going to bring a relationship closer. I mean, think about your closest friends. If they make you feel comforted whenever you're going through something difficult, you tend to be closer with them. And if they made you feel comfortable and like that's a safe space to talk about it, you tend to go to that person more often to talk about that topic. So when you're able to be that safe space for somebody, especially if you're trying to deepen a relationship, that's a really great way to do that. But obviously we don't want to do this just for our own needs. We want to do it for others because it does help their self-esteem, and it's also just going to create a better positive climate within our relationship. One thing to note is that researchers suggest that heavy social media users tend to feel less emotional support. And that might just mean that, it might be because you're more disconnected, you're seeing lots of news articles, which, I'm not going to go into all that, but sometimes reality, actually talking with somebody and expressing something that you're going through can really be more helpful than just watching a video on how to deal with it yourself. So let's go over the guidelines. On this slide, we have the first 2, and I believe there's 4, maybe a total of 5. But the first one is clarifying supportive intentions. So whenever you go into a conversation with somebody, especially when you're comforting, you want to immediately give them, tell them that you're here to help, that you want to listen, that you're opening that space for them to communicate with you. An example of that is if something is going on, I'd like to help, even if all I can do is listen. What's going on? And the second thing that I love about that statement is something we'll talk about in the next slide, but even if all I can do is listen, communicates to the other person that if you don't want my advice, that's okay. I can just listen to you, because we've all been there where we want to get something off our chest, but we really don't need advice or someone to tell us what to do. We just want to communicate about it. So that leads us to our second guideline, which is buffer potential face threats. And so face threats are basically, if you've ever heard someone say saving face, and maybe you haven't, but if someone says like, oh, so-and-so is trying to save face, that just means that they're trying to keep the perception of themselves that they have built for others to see, right? So we kind of all create this this perception or this identity that we want to show out to the world. And so we have kind of like an upper level of that, and then it gets deeper, and like the people we're really close to get to see the deeper parts of it. But again, face is perception we want others to see. It is also what it has to do with what we feel like is our worth. So we think about our self-esteem, or you think about that perception triangle, right? Self-perception, self-concept, and self-esteem. Face is really going, the face part of this is really going to be centered around that self-esteem part. So, and the overall self-concept. But anyway, so whenever you're constructing messages, you want to make sure that you're accounting for both positive and negative face needs. Now, this is kind of tricky, because positive and negative don't mean like the positive things about a person and the negative things. What they're talking about is positive is talking about what are the desires that the person has. They want to be appreciated, they want to be liked, they want to be valued. Those are positive face needs, so you want to account for that. You also want to account for negative face needs, which again aren't bad things about the person. They just have more so to do with wanting to feel independent and self-sufficient. And that kind of goes again, when I said earlier, if all I can do is listen, I'm happy to do that. that kind of correlates with that. But an example of this would be, I know you rarely need help with things like this because you're really good at sorting things out on your own. However, I'd love to help if needed. See, that's a really great way to say, hey, I know you could do this on your own, but if you want to talk to me about it, I'm here for you. That's a good thing because you're helping them save face in a way, right? Like you're thinking about what's going to make them feel targeted, because that's kind of what face needs has to do with. If we go into a conversation with someone where we immediately are just like, well, you really don't know how to handle this, so I mean, I should probably tell you what's going on. Like how are they going to take that? They're going to say, okay, so you don't think I can handle things on my own? That is targeting their face, or like their negative face needs, because it's talking about their ability to be self-sufficient, right? It's also kind of targeting their positive face needs too, because they may not feel very valued if you think that they can't handle things on their own. So again, you want to think about, when I construct my message, am I saying anything that's going to target their identity or their perception that they're trying to put out to the world? So here are the last 3 guidelines. Number 3 is use other-centered messages. So using other-centered messages means that you're encouraging someone who is going through emotional distress to talk about how they feel, what happened, all of those things. So this is encouraging people to elaborate. An example of that would be, I see, can you share more about that? It's kind of that, and you can do that verbally, but you can also do it non-verbally, right? It's kind of that, like the head nods and the, right, I understand. Can you talk more about it? Just those, I'm listening, I'm wanting to hear more about what you're saying. Can you explain that a little better? Those kinds of things show that you're really wanting to listen to them. The next thing that we want to think about is reframing the situation. So as we're taking in information, we're really listening. I think back to that listening chapter, right? Like we're attending, we're understanding, we're remembering, we're evaluating, and then we, then we move on to the last, where we actually evaluate and give our opinion if needed. But this is kind of that portion where we're evaluating it, we're thinking about it. And we also want to kind of reframe it for them, because maybe they haven't seen something from another point of view, or they haven't looked at it from all sides. Because sometimes when you're in the middle of the emotion, it's hard to do that. Whereas if you're on the outside, it's a lot easier to see what's going on and maybe see, well, maybe that person really didn't mean it the way that you took it, or, those kinds of things. But again, we don't want to just say, well, you're wrong. I think that you're overreacting. That's going to be giving people disconfirming messages. Is also going to be targeting their face needs. So we want to think more about it, like think about it as, have you thought about it this way? Or maybe give an example. If they want you to talk about it, you might give an example from your point of view. I often like to go, in a situation I went through similar to this, and then I explain. Or, I might say, well, I understand totally where you're coming from. Have you thought about this? Or I noticed that when you talk about this person, I think maybe they kind of already make you upset. So maybe this, Like you could kind of just talk about reframing, seeing it from different ones, but you still don't want to tell them that they're wrong. That's not the purpose here. You're just trying to help them see all angles, which then usually leads straight to the last of these guidelines, which is give advice. One of the most important things from this chapter that I hope that you'll get, or at least from these guidelines, is that you should always ask first if the person wants advice. I actually the chapter says, to do steps 1 through 4, and then, but I do kind of two different things with that. Like at the very beginning, when I'm telling someone that I'm offering support, I then immediately also ask, and also, do you want me, like when they start, I usually say, hey, do you want me to listen just to listen, or would you like for me to kind of listen, evaluate, give you some advice afterwards? And the reason I do that is because that kind of changes the way that I listen. If I'm giving advice, I'm going to be really listening in a kind of a different way, analyzing differently, and then waiting to, at the end, give my advice. Whereas if I am just listening to be an emotional support and not really give advice, I'm going to just listen, still analyze, still listen, but it's more so there just to give empathy, right? I'm just empathizing. I'm not necessarily trying to evaluate and come up with an idea. So again, don't give advice until you've completed items 1 through 4, especially because I think sometimes reframing can lead to advice giving. But again, ask if your partner or the person that you're talking to wants that advice. And an example of that would be, is it okay if I give some advice? And if they say yes, okay, maybe you could wait and then you kind of go on with it. So anyways, I hope that that's helpful. These guidelines can really make communication with somebody going through something difficult a lot easier and better, and it will help you be a better emotional support for someone.